it's a strange place to start the story of the birth of the church. I'll give you that. But of the thousands of historical locations that you can insert yourself, I think this one is the most poignant. This cave, this refuge for a rebel general, and the things that went on here. So as we approach the entrance here, I'm going to tell you the greatest story about how we as believers came to be here at all. You walk into this cave, and you can hear voices, not many, and you see firelight, but it's around a corner. So you go around the corner, and on the way in, you see there's a little fire, maybe a torch left on the ground, and there's a bunch of bloody weapons, lots of bloody clothes, and as you go further into the cave, lots of dead people without clothes. And I don't know why that is, but that's just the case. You continue walking, and as you approach the corner where the voices are, you turn the corner carefully, and you see two men standing. Blood all over them, daggers in their hands, out of breath, probably resting on each other. They're so tired. And one of them says, "Listen, it's ridiculous. Let's just stop killing each other. Turn ourselves in and submit ourselves to questioning, answer a few questions, get a cot and a sandwich, and call it a day." And so they do. You walk out behind these two men, and you see them surrender to a small special forces detachment outside. So they're bound honorably, and they walk towards the Roman camp, which is it's a ways down the hill and back up. You have to understand, this entire region is burning because Vespasian started this in 66. Hiding places are in short supply. There are lots of them, but there are lots of Romans. We enter Vespasian's camp. We don't know what happens to the other guy. He just disappears. Maybe he dies in a cage or something. I don't know, because they are held in cages for a little bit. Yusuf sits down across from Vespasian, and next to Yusuf sits Titus. There are probably some attendants in the room, probably a sergeant at arms at the tent flap. It's a typical setting. Vespasian asks question number one of our friend Yusuf. Who are you? And this is where we learn who he is. Eventually, Yusuf would become Josephus, which is what we're going to call him from here on out. So Josephus rattles off his credentials, which, by the way, outweigh Paul's credentials almost to the factor of 10. This guy is a member of the priestly class, born into the priestly line. He travels all over the world and learns. Alexandria, I think he even made it to Rome at some point. And when he comes back, the Sanhedrin, because of this revolt that's happening, makes him a general, puts him in charge of a large battalion. He, with John of Gishgala, which we're going to meet very soon here in another episode, fortify the cities. He's an avid rider. Some people say he's a thespian also. And the most significant fact, to me at least, is he is a descendant of the Maccabees. He descends from Jonathan Maccabeus, who's the brother of Judah, the Hammer Maccabeus. These are badass guerrillas that had led a successful revolt about 300 years before and rooted Antiochus and his gang out of the temple where they were sacrificing pigs in the Holy of Holies, just for good measure. We're going to talk about that story in another episode because this all goes together. But Josephus comes from that line, a really, really tough, experienced military line. Now, it's important to understand, Vespasian already has respect for Josephus because what puts Josephus in the cave with at least 40 other people, men, is a battle that happened in Jotapata, up the road. Now, Jotapata is a fortified city that is damn near invisible. You have to really know where you're looking to find this place. And then it's fortified to hell and gone. And so why Vespasian respects him is because Vespasian and Titus, on their way from Rome, he chased Josephus into Jotapata, and they set up, taking a page out of Julius Caesar's playbook, which he would do later on at the siege of Jerusalem, and set up a blockade siege. And nothing's happening. I mean, little bits of damage here and there. And they're just laughing at these guys, at the Romans. And so Vespasian was just furious. Josephus, being a military genius, waits till they go to sleep, runs outside, sets all their wooden equipment on fire, and runs back inside. And then when the infantry comes in to retaliate or to try and take the city, they get met with boiling oil over the wall. Just a classic anti-siege measure. And then Titus, who is Vespasian's son, both are there, both generals. He's had it. He takes off his, I don't even think he has his armor. He takes his helmet off, and he with a bunch of other guys at nighttime climb those city walls, gut the people at the gate, open the gate, and let the entire army in, and they slaughter, except for Josephus and his band of merry men. And they go hide in this cave where we started the story. Okay, so that's the backstory. Vespasian knows that. He probably knows about the negotiation between Josephus earlier and Nero. So Josephus has been with Nero, or at least his officials, to release 12 priests who were released. So he's a successful diplomat, negotiator. This is not a small-time guy. A peasant Jew up in the hills farming, corn and sheep. The next question Vespasian asks, what happened in the cave? Josephus takes an insane risk. He stands up out of the chair. And first off, you don't stand when the other generals are sitting. Vespasian's here and Titus is across from him. And he addresses Vespasian as Your Majesty. Protocol is that the person addressed as Your Majesty draw his sword and cut the man down. Because there is only one Your Majesty, and he isn't in the theater of war. He's got his butt in a cushy throne in Rome. Vespasian probably has his hand on his sword and says, you better explain yourself. Josephus says, no, you don't understand. I have visions and dreams. You're going to be emperor, and it's going to be soon. This is amazing because either he can cut him down as his protocol and lose all information because he knows he's got some. 2, he can hear him out and see if the information is forthcoming. Or 3, which is not really an option at all, because as is protocol, you question him and then you send him to Rome to be questioned. However, if Josephus shows up in Rome and stands in front of Nero and says, oh yes, I was in a camp with His Majesty, then Vespasian's head would also roll. So now Vespasian is caught. He really doesn't have a choice. So Vespasian invites Josephus to sit back down. I mean, the guy had to be very entertaining. I mean, Titus immediately fell in love with the guy, probably after this very meeting. Because here's why it's shocking. So you've heard Josephus. Now I'm going to tell you about Vespasian and why that's shocking. He wasn't an equestrian or a noble. His dad was a banker. He had no pedigree. He shouldn't have even been a general, if not for his success, because he was a colonel in Thrace. He was governor of Africa, which is important later, soon later. And he even made it up to consul. He was an advisor to Nero until he made a grave error. Nero fancied himself an entertainer, and he would write plays starring himself that would last upwards of 12 hours, and everyone had to go. Well, poor Vespasian, probably after a day of fighting someone, fell asleep. And Nero went into a rage and banished him to a beekeeping community. He had experience with that kind of thing. I mean, he grew up, he was actually a mule, scholars say mule farmer, but my grandfather always said that a rancher is a person who manhandles animals. A farmer is one who sits and watches shit grow all day. So a mule rancher, really. In 66, in this valley called Bet Horon, a legion of 5,000, and I think it was 12 fulminata, 5,000 men are attacked by what they think are Jewish peasants. 2,400 of them, half as many, and they destroy the legion, and they take their standard. Now, if there's anything that motivates a Roman soldier, it is vengeance, and that comes later, in such a sweet way if you're Rome. This is when the revolt really kicks into gear. Nero's had enough. He knows, because Vespasian was close to him, he's a part of his inner circle, who's the best candidate, and he just banished him for something stupid like falling asleep. Well, it wasn't stupid to Nero, it was obviously a capital crime. So Nero sends Titus to fetch his father from the beekeeping community. Now, this is a detail I just picked up recently, and I didn't know this, and it just makes the story that much sweeter. In Rome is a punk named Domitian, all right? This is Titus's stepbrother. He eventually becomes the third of the Flavian emperors. He's close to Nero. And he said, well, he's damn near as crazy as Nero. Vespasian and Titus go to Judea, and they raze half the country, burn it down, and they end up at Jotapata. And then Josephus goes into the cave, and that's how he ended up right here in the tent. All right. Now, he knows ultimately, Vespasian, that the real fight's right behind him in Jerusalem, the walled city, a walled city. I shouldn't have said that because we're going to talk about walled city, and it means something different. All right. I know it seems like I'm jumping around. There's a lot of information, but maybe I may make a PDF or something you can download and just get the Cliff Notes version. But it's important that I tell the story this way. In the tent, Vespasian, Titus, Josephus. Now, he knows the ultimate prize is Jerusalem, which is behind him, which is what they're planning for. Now they have Josephus, who has inside information. And so he says, okay, General Josephus, how about you negotiate with them to see if we can bring this to some kind of a peaceful conclusion? Josephus agrees, and the negotiations eventually commence. Now, we're going to pause this scene, and we're going to jump right over the walls into Jerusalem. You've got three factions fighting for control of the city. So we have a war within a war. And at this point, Vespasian and Titus, because, look, Julius Caesar set a pretty steep precedent. I mean, siege blockades, starving them out, not working until you have to work. We're in the city. You have a temple that is not functioning, which is interesting because a lot of scholars don't talk about that. And when did it stop functioning? Well, it stopped functioning after a certain earthquake. After a certain darkness fell on the earth temporarily. After a certain Jewish man on a cross said it is finished. And when it happened, a lot of things went wonky. The door to the temple wouldn't stay shut. One of the lamps wouldn't stay lit. And most importantly, the scarlet cord, which is supposed to turn white when God has accepted the sacrifices and sins are forgiven, wouldn't turn white anymore. And that was after that earthquake. The whole system stopped working. You have three factions, one led by John of Gishgala, one of Simon Bar Giora, another one is Eleazar ben Simon, okay? And they're killing each other. They've already killed the priests, high priests. Now, one sage in particular, who happens to actually be the uncle of one of the faction leaders, has had it. It's senseless. They're burning each other's food supplies to try and piss each other off, which is rather counterproductive. And by this time, a sage named Yochanan ben Zakkai comes up with a plan. You see, the factions are controlling the city. They don't want anyone out because they don't want them negotiating with the Romans. That's threat number one. So Yochanan ben Zakkai, who has in his mind to do exactly that, talks to his followers, creates a concoction where his heart rate is slowed, and very much appears to be dead, because every day they would take the dead out of the city. So, long story short, he gets into a coffin. He falls into that sleep state. They put the coffin lid on, get to the gate. One legend says that a guard stuck a couple of swords through, goes out of the city, and they drop him right outside Vespasian's tent. So imagine this scene. We're back here with Vespasian, Josephus, and Titus. But we've got room for another chair. And it will soon be filled. Because Vespasian goes out to see what's going on. Yochanan ben Zakkai pops out of the coffin, surprise. And what does he say? Your Majesty. That's what he says. This time Vespasian actually draws a sword. He says, 2 reasons I should kill you. Number 1, you don't address me as your Majesty. I'm a general. We've already had this discussion with someone else. And number 2, what the hell took you so long to come out of there, and what are they doing in there? And Yochanan ben Zakkai basically says, I don't know. They've gone crazy. I've given up. Here's what I'm asking for. To be given a plot of land in Yavne to set up his school. Vespasian says, come inside of the tent. Now we have Yochanan ben Zakkai coming into the tent, who probably knows Josephus. And they're sitting across from each other, probably kind of trying to avoid each other's stares. And Vespasian, if you can imagine, and this isn't recording, but I've talked to 3 scholars. 2 of them are famous scholars that you would know if you watch documentaries. One of them is a professor at Yale. I ran this scenario by them, and they said, your facts are lined up, it's plausible, tell your stupid story. Which is what I always get when I talk to scholars and ask permission to tell a story. In this room, Vespasian now suspicious. He's got 2 Jewish guys that are prominent telling him he's going to be the emperor. I smell conspiracy. He's ready to cut them down. When the thunder of horses' hooves, just outside. And I imagine as Vespasian is ready to get rid of both these guys, into the tent comes a runty little messenger. I don't actually know if he was runty. I just see him as runty. Out of breath, falls on the ground. And just as Vespasian is about to read him the riot act, this kid looks up and says, Emperor Nero, son of a god, is dead. And everything changes. Vespasian's goals, his ambitions, change. Remember when I talked about that impish little gutter snipe, Domitian? It's close to Nero. Well, Nero's dead. Immediately through Vespasian's mind goes a list of possible candidates, and the top of the list that could be the worst possible outcome is his own son Domitian. He turns and looks at Yochanan ben Zakkai and says, all 3 wishes granted, congratulations, off you go. To Josephus he says, you are staying in Titus's tent. We need you close by. He says to Titus, you're taking control. I, meanwhile, am going to take a legion and go to North Africa, where he was a governor and where he has troops loyal to him. The most important thing about North Africa is he's going to go put his foot on the throat of the food chain going to Rome. So he's got a legion there to put down any resistance to his emperorship. And he goes down to where the rubber meets the road, the food supply. Now, I imagine he could set up a camp outside of Rome where soldiers could get to the food, but nobody in the city could get to the food, because you got to keep soldiers on your side fed. But he's in total control now. Yochanan ben Zakkai exits stage left, on his way to Yavne to start a school, which would become the Judaism we have today, or it wouldn't become Judaism at all, because it would die in that temple soon. Vespasian exits stage right, on his way to North Africa. Titus is in full control with Josephus. And now the fun begins. And the next episode, we're going to talk about Titus and Josephus' relationship and what all of this starts to look like when the most important system in Judaism is about to fall. And the way it falls, you cannot write in 1,000 scripts. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode.